They were waiting on the landing ramp at first light, two bundles of teeth and curiosity pretending to be civilized while the Alpha watched from the ridge like a shadow that had grown eyes. The cubs blinked in the cold. The ridge did not blink at all. The door hissed. I stepped out with a shock blanket and a lab coat full of regrets. One cub chirred, the other tasted the railing with an expression of profound study. "Don't touch them," Sergeant Avi Patel muttered, and then, betraying himself, added, "They're adorable. But don't touch them." "She's up there," I said, raising my chin toward the silhouette cut out of the purple sky. 30 stone of apex precision. The Alpha didn't move. She was letting us audition. Engineer Lena Kovacs arrived with a crate of emergency rations and the face of someone nominated to babysit a thunderstorm. "Are those our problem now?" "They're a message," I said. The planet had been introducing itself in smudges, tracks, shredded drones, night music that made the gate cameras hum. Today it wrote in bold letters. Cub 1 pressed his head to my shin as if he'd known me in a previous life. Cub 2 shoved his nose into my coat and discovered pockets, which is a universal mammalian sign for hospitality. On the ridge, a huge ear twitched. "Base," Avi said into his mic. "Situation yellow. 2 juvenile Silex on ramp A, mother on ridge north. Guidance? Do not engage," Commander Havel answered. His voice was always calm, but it acquired new vowels when he was awake before coffee. "Dr. Osman has point." The xenobiologist gets point whenever the unknown shows up chewing on cables. I knelt, palms out. The cubs warmed my fingers with engine breath. They were midnight with pale chevrons along the spine, like someone had traced constellations across moving fur. Their teeth were little crescent knives. Their paws were ridiculous. They squeaked. "Hi," I told the test. "You've picked a terrible daycare." Inside the vestibule we invented comedy. The cubs weighed like bags of water with opinions. They ricocheted off a bench, then ate the bench, which made Lena declare new physics in Hungarian. Avi stood guard with his rifle pointed at the floor, jaw set hard enough to tune a guitar. On the ridge, the Alpha's shadow shifted a patient centimeter. "What's the plan?" Avi asked. He always sounded angrier than he felt, a defense mechanism developed by security professionals and large geese. "Keep them? Feed them? Draft a stern letter to apex predators? We show we can be trusted," I said. I tore a ration block into kindness-sized chunks. The cubs inhaled it. One hiccuped, then looked betrayed by its own diaphragm. "Chaos," Lena noted, glancing toward the north annex where 3 kilometers of power cabling coiled like linguini. "We now own it." The Alpha took a step back into the shadow as if gifting us the threshold. "If you're queen of the food web and newcomers in a tin can keep not dying, you probe. Your test costs can't be your children. But the cost of not knowing what we do when handed responsibility could be worse." "Names," Lena said quickly. "People name what they fear so they have something to hold. This one is left." She pointed to the pocket explorer. "That one is other left." "I hate it," Avi said, which meant the name stuck immediately. By midday the base smelled like wet dog and ambition. Havel authorized a quarantine plan, my lab as a den, door locked, vents filtered, anything chewable relocated to the top shelf where cubs and engineers could not reach. Other left regarded my microscope with holy awe and then tried to baptize it with soup. Left learned ambush from under the towel shelf. His entire body squeaked. From the ridge the Alpha never left. You can acclimate to anything but an audience. Each time I carried the cubs outside for sunlight and a supervised tumble, her gaze pressed between my shoulders. Once, other left raised his nose and answered a far call with a noise so small it rearranged my bones. The reply was silence, which somehow sounded like approval. The unusual thing, the part that made science bleed into slapstick, was how fast everyone else fell in love. The comms techs, who sneered at supernovas for interrupting lunch, scheduled breaks around den time. Havel, emotional as a basalt cliff, appeared with a book. Detest acoustics, and ended up reading aloud until I coughed softly and he fled. Avi insisted on calling them, subjects, and then carried both for an hour because subjects require warmth. Lena built a baby gate out of 2 cargo nets, a broken ladder, and 4 bungee cords. The cubs solved it in 8 seconds and sat down proudly to wait for applause. I said Puck, the paralinguistic analyzer that never met a Yelp it didn't want to overfit, to recording. It spat out probability maps of intent that included hungry, sleepy, and, worryingly, teaching. Teaching implied planned behavior, which implied culture, which implied stakes we had not budgeted for. In response, Left dragged a blanket to my boots and presented it with a chur that Puck labeled offering/appeasement/ please admire me. We admired him. He became unbearable. By dinner, half the base spoke fluent baby chur, and the other half pretended not to badly at all. In the quiet hours, the question sharpened. If the Alpha's test was about nurture, then failing it might mean being listed under unreliable scavengers in whatever ledger the Silex kept. They could make supply runs vanish, harry our survey teams, end the fragile contract that let us breathe here without paying a blood tax. Or, if we passed, we might inherit something rarer than territory, permission. What's the worst-case outcome? Avi asked that evening, casual like people are casual before a medical test. We keep them, Mom eats us? Worst case is we fail to understand the test, I said. Protocol said minimize interference. Ethics said we were guests on a world with no word for guest. None of that explained the treaty feeling in my palm when other Left laid a stolen bolt there with ceremonial gravity. We ate in the mess with the doors shut and the windows open to the ridge. Lena drew a scale diagram of the base on the whiteboard and added tiny teeth marks along the walls. Someone put googly eyes on the safety poster. We laughed too hard. Tension never leaves, it changes key. At 0300 a low note rippled across the compound, not a roar or demand, more like a chord struck on an instrument our ears had only just learned to hear. Left and other Left shot upright in their nest, pupils dilating until they were all night. They stared at the door. She's calling, Avi said, hand hovering near the lock without touching it. We could have pretended to miss it. Humans are gifted at ignoring invoices, alarms, and fate. But we were being watched by a mother who had placed her children in our incompetent, tender hands. I unclipped the knot leash, a loop of parachute cord that made me feel better, and squatted. It's okay, I told the cubs. Field trip. Outside, Frost wrote delicate equations across the landing pad. The twin moons hung low, big and sleepy. The Alpha waited at the foot of the ridge. Seeing her this close reset several definitions inside me: large, graceful, unarguable. She did not growl. She looked from the cubs to me like a teacher collecting a homework assignment. Rhea, Lena whispered. She wants to know if you bring them back. I crouched to unlatch the cord. Left pressed against me once, a legalism of goodbye. Other Left trotted forward as if the night had rolled out a carpet. At 3 meters they sank into a crawl so low their bellies kissed the frost. The Alpha swayed closer and breathed them in, ritual and inventory. Then she looked at me and did something impossible. She turned her throat toward me, exposing the pale fur where a misjudged winter could end a life. Avi swore. My brain imitated a blank page. Submission? Invitation? Trust, that dangerous word. Slowly, sudden is for prey. I extended my hand until heat wrapped it like a nearness to fire. The Alpha exhaled a sound you don't so much hear as feel in your teeth. Behind me, I sensed the base leaning through the doorway, a collection of lungs and hopes and breakable machines, all balancing on a thin bridge between fear and the decision that would define us to a species that ate problems for breakfast. Okay, I told the night, the Alpha, the 2 ridiculous cubs, and myself. We're listening. The Alpha's eyes caught both moons, and in their mirrored light I thought I saw a future assemble itself, joint by cautious joint, as if the planet were also holding out its throat to see what we would do next. The Alpha did not vanish after that night. She lingered at the ridge for days, sometimes lying in full view, sometimes just a suggestion in the mist, her golden eyes fixed on the base like a question we hadn't answered yet. The cubs had settled into a routine that was equal parts heart-melting and nerve-shredding, naps under my workstation, ambushes from the towel shelves, occasional attempts to scale the ventilation ducts, but it was obvious this wasn't just temporary custody. She was still testing us. The first real complication came at dawn 3 days later. A long, low tremor rolled through the ground, enough to make the coffee in my cup ripple. Avi was on watch and called it in. "We've got something big moving southeast 30 clicks out. Quadruped gate. Maybe a full hunting party." Lena, bleary-eyed but already sliding into boots, muttered, "So the in-laws are coming." We stepped outside to get a clearer visual. The ridge was empty, no Alpha, no watching eyes, but the chorus of distant calls was unmistakable. It wasn't a random gathering. The tone was coordinated, layered, the kind of sound that makes the hairs on your arms agree you're prey. The cubs heard it too. Left froze mid-bounce, ears flat, tail low. Other left darted behind my legs and peeked out in jerks. They knew those voices. Back in the command room, Havel threw up a terrain overlay. "If that pack's heading this way, they'll cross the floodplain in less than an hour. And they'll pass within sight of the base." He glanced at me. "That's her hunting group?" "Likely," I said. "And this," I gestured toward the cubs watching from the corner, "is either a lesson or a trap." We had 2 problems now: keep the cubs safe from whatever the hunting party's intent was, and avoid breaking whatever invisible rules the Alpha had set. If we locked the cubs away too aggressively, we might signal distrust. But if we did nothing, we might lose them. Lena came up with the first piece of the solution. "We use the east paddock as a semi-controlled space," she said. "They can see the party pass, smell them, but there's a double barrier and elevated walkways for us to monitor." It worked, sort of. The cubs didn't like being herded outside the usual dense space, and it took an embarrassing amount of ration blocks to coax them through the inner gate. Still, once there, they pressed noses to the mesh and watched the horizon. The hunting party appeared as shifting shadows on the far ridge, their forms enormous against the pale sky. They didn't break stride, didn't howl or challenge, but every head turned toward the paddock in perfect unison as they passed. One of the younger hunters, a massive male with pale facial stripes, slowed slightly, sniffing the wind toward us. Left let out a small, sharp chirp that carried across the plain. The hunter's ears twitched, and he made a low sound in return before catching up to the group. When they were gone, the Alpha returned, slipping into view at the same ridge line where they'd first left the cubs. Her gaze moved from the paddock to me, then to the open plain where the hunting party had passed. "She was watching the whole time," Avi murmured. That night, complications escalated again. A directorate crawler convoy arrived without warning, 3 bulky transports, bristling with antennae. The lead vehicle's side bore the silver-blue seal of the Colonial Environmental Authority, which was never good news for scientists with unofficial arrangements. Their lead officer, a man named Sato, stepped out with a tablet already running a briefing. "We've had reports of Silex juveniles being held here," he said without preamble. "We're here to tag and monitor them." Havel's tone cooled several degrees. "They are not property. They are here under the care of our science team as part of ongoing contact protocols." Sato's eyes skimmed past him to the paddock camera feed. "We'll be installing non-invasive telemetry. That's not a request." I could feel the cubs tense even from inside the lab when Sato's team approached the enclosure with their sleek, humming tag rigs. This wasn't just a complication, it was a direct risk to the fragile rapport we had with the Alpha. A wrong move here could make her decide the experiment was over, and that we'd failed. We needed to stall. Lena whispered a plan while we pretended to review tag schematics. "We let them think they're tagging," she said. "But the devices they get on the cubs will be inert decoys." She pointed to the 3D printer. "Give me 30 minutes. I kept Sato busy, explaining the need for scent masking, gradual introduction, and calibration, with objects the cubs had interacted with. He didn't care, but bureaucracy loves the sound of process, and every minute he stood there nodding was a minute Lena had to finish the fake tags. By sunset, Sato's team had, successfully tagged, both cubs, each one wearing a harmless lump of resin shaped like a tracker. The real data we'd gather ourselves, with passive beacons small enough to tuck into the cub's fur without notice. The Alpha didn't appear that night. Whether that meant approval or the prelude to a harder test, none of us could tell. What we did know was this: she'd set the bar higher. And somewhere out there, the rest of her kind had now seen us with her young. Whatever came next, we were no longer dealing with just one predator's judgment. We were under the eyes of the pack. The storm hit before dawn, the kind that doesn't arrive so much as erase the horizon. 1 minute the ridge was there, the next it was a smear of shadow behind sheets of rain. The cubs were restless, pacing the lab in tight little circuits, chirring to one another in short, urgent bursts. Puck's translation overlay kept spitting out guesses: change, move, wrong smell, none of which made me feel better. By 0500, Havel was in the command room with a steaming mug and a map lit in angry red. "Survey D is flooding," he said. "We've got human crews pinned between the rising water and the eastern treeline. That treeline's been active all night, ferals or worse." "Worse," Avi said flatly. "I've been picking up a big signature moving parallel to them. Not random." The Alpha was gone from her usual perch. That absence throbbed like an unanswered question. The cubs noticed too. Left kept stopping at the window, pressing his nose to the glass, then pacing again. We might have held the line, kept to base, if not for what happened next. Puck's audio sensors picked up a faint, high-pitched keening from the east. It wasn't human. It wasn't feral. It was Silex young. Not our cubs. I didn't need to say anything. Avi was already pulling up satellite overlays. "That's near the floodplain. If those calves get trapped..." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Sato, still lurking like a shadow near the comms desk, leaned in. "Your Alpha's problem. Not ours. Everything on this planet is our problem," Lena snapped. Havel waited for about 3 seconds. "You three gear up. Osman, Patel, Kovacs. Sato, you're our comms relay. Keep the orbital off our backs for as long as possible." That got us moving fast. Rain gear, waders, ropes, field medkits. I clipped the passive beacons into my sleeves. Lena tucked a coil of citrus cloth strips into her pack. Feral deterrent, if we were lucky. Avi checked his rifle but kept it slung low. The cubs crowded us at the gate, churring rapid sequences that Puck tagged as "come back, watch sky." I crouched, pressed my forehead lightly to each of theirs. "You're staying," I said. They didn't like it, but they didn't follow when the gate closed behind us. The floodplain was a nightmare of shifting channels and half-submerged debris. Water moved in braided torrents, carrying logs, mud, and the occasional flash of something with too many teeth. Every step had to be tested before committing weight. We found the first calf tangled in reeds, eyes wide, breathing fast. Avi waded in and freed it with slow, steady movements, guiding it to a patch of higher ground. Its call was answered almost immediately by another, farther off. 2 more were huddled together in the lee of a fallen tree. Lena and I worked to clear the blockage pinning their tails. The whole time, I could feel eyes on us, something in the treeline keeping pace. Not ferals. The gaze was too steady, too patient. The last call was different, fainter, weaker. We tracked it to a narrow gully where floodwater poured over a rock lip into a churning pool. The calf was wedged against the wall, half submerged, fighting to keep its head above water. The bank crumbled under my first attempt to get close. Lena anchored a line. Avi took position with eyes on the treeline. I slid down, chest deep in freezing water, and got my arms around the calf. It was all bone and panic, kicking hard enough to bruise. A sharp movement in the corner of my vision, a pale flash between trees. Bigger than the ferals we'd seen before. Not the Alpha. "Contact, West Ridge!" Avi's voice was tight. "Not friendly!" The thing that stepped into view was a rival predator, broad-shouldered, scarred, its gaze locked on the calf in my arms. It began a slow, deliberate approach, each step silent despite its size. I had no weapon in hand, only the calf and the rope line to Lena. If I made a run for it, I'd have my back to it for 10 seconds too long. Then the sound came, low, rising, unmistakable. The Alpha's chord. Not from my puck playback this time, but from the ridge itself. It was joined by another, and another, the hunting party's voices layering into a wall of sound. The rival predator froze, head swinging toward the ridge. Then it melted back into the trees, vanishing as if it had never been there. We hauled the calf up, muscles screaming, water dragging at every step. By the time we reached the stretchers, the rain was easing and the ridge was full of silhouettes. The Alpha was at the front, eyes on me, on the calf I'd carried, on the cluster of others we'd pulled from the flood. She didn't move closer, didn't vocalize again, just stood there until every rescued calf was wrapped and stable. Only then did she turn away, the hunting party flowing after her like a single animal. The message was as clear as anything she'd given us yet: you acted as kin. We saw it. We started back toward the base, the sky breaking into ragged sunlight. The cubs were waiting at the gate, tails flicking, as if they already knew the outcome. And in that moment, I realized the test wasn't over. It was just changing into something far more dangerous. The ridge was empty for 3 days after the flood, and the absence had weight. No Alpha. No hunting party. No chorus rolling through the dusk. Even the cubs seemed unsettled, less play, more watching the windows, their small ears twitching at sounds too faint for us to hear. It felt like the quiet before a verdict. Havel didn't like it. Predators don't just vanish after a display like that, he said in the mess, leaning over a map. They regroup. They decide what the next move is. And if we passed? Lena asked. Then the next move might be closer, I said. The answer came on the 4th morning. At first it was just movement on the east ridge, a ripple of shadow among the trees, but then the shapes resolved into the Alpha and 5 others from her hunting party. They were not passing at a distance this time. They were coming straight for the base. The cubs exploded into rapid churring, tails high, darting to the gate. Their excitement was almost manic, but my stomach knotted tight. Direct approach meant escalation, either acceptance into something deeper, or removal from the equation entirely. Sato was already at the comms desk. If they breach perimeter, I have clearance to activate deterrent emitters. You do that, Avi said without looking up from his rifle, and you might as well start digging your own grave. She's not here to test hardware. The Alpha stopped 20 meters from the outer fence. Her eyes moved from each of us to the cubs pressed against the inner gate, then to the eastern tree-line. She rumbled low, not the hunting chord, not the reprimand tone. Something different. Puck hesitated, then translated in 3 blunt words, "Bring them out." My mouth went dry. This was the moment every guess, every improvised solution, every restraint in the face of Sato's interference had been leading to. I glanced at Havel. He gave the smallest nod. The inner gate rolled open. The cubs burst out, not toward her, but toward the space between us, pausing, looking back at me, churring something Puck couldn't translate fast enough. The Alpha stepped forward until the fence was all that separated us. She lowered her head, not in submission, but in deliberate alignment, eyes level with mine. Then she did the thing she had done the first night, exposed her throat. The other hunters mirrored the gesture, a ripple of pale fur flashing down the line. That's not just trust, Lena whispered. That's invitation. The gate controls felt heavy under my hands. Avi stood beside me, rifle lowered, scanning the ridge but not interfering. When the outer gate opened, the cubs shot forward and vanished into the forest of legs like they'd never been gone. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the Alpha stepped back, and to my shock, she turned her head toward the hunting party and barked a short, sharp command. 2 of the hunters moved forward, not aggressive, but purposeful, and dropped something just inside the gate. Bones. Polished, strung with braided sinew. Not a threat display. An offering. I picked it up, the weight both alien and somehow ceremonial. The Alpha watched me do it, then gave one last, low note, short, final, and turned away. The hunting party followed, the cubs prancing between them without a backward glance. They were gone within minutes. The base was quiet again, but the quiet was different. Not the hollow absence of waiting for judgment, but the stillness after a chapter ends. On the mess table, the bone and sinew piece lay like a puzzle with only one solution. We were no longer just tolerated here. We had been written into their ledger. That night, I stood at the fence under the moonlight, turning the gift in my hands. The pattern in the braids looked almost like the chevrons along the cub's spines. I wondered how many seasons from now someone would tell the story of the time an alpha left her young with humans, and they came back. And maybe somewhere beyond the ridge, the cubs would hear it and remember us, not as captors or curiosities, but as something rarer. Kin.